Yeah, hello, my name is Kappel, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Most of my time is spent on people who know very little about anything. And that's very tiresome sometimes, but in this room we have very knowledgeable people, and I always like that. It happens 2 or 3 times a year, max. So it's always nice when the people know what you're talking about, and you don't have to start with Adam and Eve, as I often have to do. When I speak to politicians and the commission and other interest groups. So there are a lot of angles you can take to go into angling, and I only have 15 minutes, so I was a bit confused what to do about that. So, but luckily we have 3 days, so I can take some things today and move on the other days with other issues. One issue I will not touch today, and not the next 2 days, is climate change. Some of you will claim this is the biggest threat to fishing, including angling, at all, but what can we do about it? Send money to the CERN, speed them up, doing this fusion reactor. I think that's the only solution. But climate change is very real in my daily job because you have a lot of power sources, renewable energies, who claims to help us all to combat climate change. Hydropower, they call it green energy, and those of you who know just a little about it knows there's nothing green to say about it. So we spend a lot of effort on combating hydropower, and yesterday I could put on our Facebook page that the Commission has now sued for Austria to court for a hydropower plant installation, which already is started, but we hope the European Court will stop it. And we have other cases. We have a very good case in Sweden, where the national court system tell us that fish needs to migrate, not only salmon and trout and eels and so on, but all fish needs space in the rivers to fulfill their life cycle. And that, I have said, is a game changer in Sweden, and hopefully it will be a game changer for the rest of Europe, but let's see about that. Okay, some of the things I will talk about, substrate fishing, recreational fishing, and so on, you have already touched it. I will maybe do it in a little more structured way, kind of fertilize the ground for what I thought would come up those days, and always did actually. Just a little about ourselves. I've been in my job for 12 years now, and partly funded by the European Anglers Alliance and also the tax rate. And we share an office in Brussels. And from there we lobby the European institutions. We have now 14 members in 13 European countries. We have 2 organizations in Ireland. And we have some affiliated members as well. 11 members in 28. Of course, our goal is to have members in all 28 one day. And on top of that, also more European countries. We already have more. But not Iceland. Not yet. So we have 4 Nordic members now, and there's Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And to me, the Nordic Council is very important, and I really hope we can do business with the Nordic Council because they can bring us as angling organizations closer together in the Nordic. Problem with the Nordic is exactly that some of the legislation is EU regulated others are not. For freshwater, it's more equal because Norway has signed up to the Water Framework Directives and Habitats Directive and so on. But on the seaside, things are very, very different. You already heard a bit about how much recreational catches can be sold legally in Norway. That was not possible in England. Yeah, we have organized ourselves within the European Anglers Alliance around 2 subgroups, and then we have some ad hoc groups, which I will not talk more about. We are sitting in as many of those influential bodies as we can find, but we have scarce resources, so we have to prioritize. But I think we are pretty good represented where it really matters. We are not very good on the United Nations, but maybe some good time. The sea fisheries, commercial sea fisheries, is totally EU competence. At the last 10 years ago, those advisory councils were set up, and I was part of the lobbying, the content of the legislation for those regional advisory committees, and I managed to have recreational fishing, sport fishing mentioned in the legislation. So we can require minimum 1 seat on all those bodies, and we have representation on all of them. The problem now is that they have added 4 more to them, and we are really only interested in the new advisory council for aquaculture, and we will go on board that. It will be launched later this year. Aquaculture is one of the European Commission's darlings, and they want to boost aquaculture, and some of you know all the problems with escaped salmon, escaped other fish, lice, diseases, and so on. So this will be boosted as well if nothing happens. So therefore we need to be on that advisory council. So a bit about terminology, which you already have spoken a bit about. When I started here and asked what is angling and what is recreational angling and sport, I heard all kinds of terms, and there were all kinds of explanations, but not very structured, and especially not from one country to another, and especially not from one language to another. Angling doesn't exist in the Southern European languages. You have to explain what angling is. So only in English you have a nice term in German, you have Angler in German as well. So we had to try to find out something which would work consistently in one language, but hopefully also across the languages. And we pinned out French and English, and we never really came to a fully agreement on it. The French still really don't like the way we have defined angling, because again they use some other terms. And this is the one I will show you. We ended up on recreational fishing, divided it in 2 parts. Recreational angling, sport fishing, we tried to separate that. And then we said, and then we have all the other kinds of recreational fishing. And then we have commercial fishing. So we have three things. Later we found out that maybe we should have talked about subsistence fishing as well. That came into a document done by IFA, which I'm happy about, because it's part of the whole picture. So now I would say I'm the Secretary General of the European Angling Alliance, Anglers Alliance. So then you will say, okay, that's those guys over there. No, it's more than that. Finland, Norway, Sweden, they also have members who catch small amounts of fish with private nets. So actually we are also representing parts of the other stuff over there. In my daily work I don't feel it much. I am focused on angling mostly and mainly, but it is difficult in daily life to separate the two. In Denmark they have been very consequent, and when I should give anybody good advice, I tell them to look at the Danish legislation. As far as I remember, there are 4 categories, and that means all kinds of fishing, and especially angling, has its own category, and then you have some part-time fishers, you have other recreational fishers, semi-commercial fishers, and they are all regulated and they pay fees and so on. So if you want to clean up in your own country, I suggest you start looking at the Danish legislation. I don't know, is that the Danish people laughing or what? No, that was the Norwegian.
Vi kender det godt. Vi kender det nok til stemme på.
So, we have over the years been trying to influence, and you find my name and other names in the foreword to all the place. So we have been very dedicated and focused on that. We need those definitions to be as good as possible, because otherwise the whole idea was to end up with a pan-European socio-economic study done at the same time all over Europe. But to do so and make any meaning out of it, you need to have some basics which are the same, so it can be comparable across the board. And even if you have very good terms, it is very difficult to compare results across the borders. But we thought we need to try it. As they do in the United States. They do this every 50 years since 1955. So why can we not do it in Europe? Yeah, I'm sure we can, but if we have the money, that's the problem. In the United States they have the money because they have an excise tax where the anglers and others pay for a little tax on when they buy a rod, and also on the fuel to the recreational boats and so on. That generates a humongous amount of money, and some of that money is spent on science and this socio-economic study that we could do. I would very much like to see something that happen in Europe as well. And then again, maybe the Nordic council, the Nordic countries, could find a way to generate more money to such studies, Nordic studies, for a start, across the board. I don't know. So I will not talk about all the freshwater issues. Maybe we will touch on them later. They are very important, but right now we are in a process where the common fisheries policy, which is about sea fisheries, has been adopted and took effect 1st of January, and now we are in the implementation phase. And as often happens, always happens with EU legislation of this caliber, there are a lot of unknowns, gray zones, loopholes, and stuff which has to be dealt with from now and in practice the next 10 years to the next season. And we have to be in there because there are stuff important for animals. So we lobbied successfully the European Parliament to accept a specific, explicit mention of recreational fishing. This was not the way I told them to phrase it, but again, they were very up their heads in discard ban and other stuff, so we really had to kick ourselves all the way into this. And this was good enough for me to work on now in the implementation phase. Had it been adopted, but the Council of Ministers, who are your fisheries ministers, and not for reference, but I say that they are commercial fisheries polluted in a way, and very difficult to talk about anything else. And not surprisingly, they instead of helping us, they actually gave us this negative thing instead. And in a recital, which is up front, outside the article, so they were very careful that recreational angling should have nothing in any article. So sometimes you have to be careful what you're asking about, because the more we ask, the more ops and focused they were to keep us out. And the better they were. I saw several drafts, and every draft was improved less and less for me to hang my hat on. So, and we talked to some ministers, and in Holland, for example, we were told, yeah, maybe you have a lot of sense, and but I think you are 10 years too early. I said, you are 10 years too late. We started lobby this CSP at the last reform. That was the first time I had 10 years ago. So, but maybe next time. Certainly EAA has now on its agenda, from now to the next CSP reform, recognition of recreational fishing, angling in the next CSP reform. It will stay on all meetings agenda from now on, otherwise it will not happen. Yeah, I have problems sometimes to explain anglers, sea anglers, especially in the UK, why it's so important to have recreational angling recognized by the CSP. And as you know, it can be difficult to convince any UK citizens about any good from EU. But it is important as long as you are a member of EU. Maybe the UK will leave EU one day, I don't know. But until they do so, or not do so, they should take this seriously. Because now we are in deep trouble on certain issues for the next 10 years because we didn't get this recognition. And I think therefore has this idea that all sea anglers were against what we have proposed, because they have talked to the wrong guys, which are very small, clever, very loud guys, and then I think they also did a survey. But I hope the UK will do another survey, but maybe we should pass the Scottish liberation and the EU referendum and all that. When we are on the other side, maybe the UK could do another sea anglers survey what they think about the CFP, because I think at that time they will know more about how we will suffer from not being part of it. To be part of it doesn't mean that we ask to have quotas, as the commercial fisherman has. And this is what most of the sea anglers are afraid of. And we don't want to do that. We have actually, on the North Sea rack, one of those 7 racks I showed you the other day, on the other side, even the commercial fishermen have signed up with us that instead of delivering a quota to anglers, the catches, the anglers' catches, should be taken out of what will be shared as quotas to commercial fishermen after. So our share out first, and then you talk tax and quotas on the rest. And that we have on front, at least from the UK and Scottish people, that they agree to that. Of course they agreed to that because at that time it was on the agenda that anglers should actually be part of the tax and quota system. And certainly they didn't like that because that could only come from one place, from their tax. Oh, sorry. So I think this was. Yeah, just to say that to EU, they don't recognize subsistence fishing, and Finland has a problem with that because you have or have a lot of unlicensed fishermen sales of fishes. And I talked to your minister at that time, and I said, well, how will you implement this? Yeah, that would be difficult. And I don't know how it. I said, well, maybe the Finnish people can tell me if they have overcome that problem. Last thing, IUU fishing, you already mentioned it before. My problem with IUU fishing is the way it's talked about, because it is only the eye which is illegal and not the other things. Very often we find ourselves that people will not give us money to do what we actually would like to do, to have maybe not a regulation, but at least we would know more about our catches and especially the socio-economic value of our catches. But very often we are seen as kind of illegal fishing. Last slide.